Hello and welcome to Jessie Bear Book Club. Today we are getting back to our Alison Weir historical fiction playlist and reviewing Innocent Traitor. This was one of Alison Weir's first historical fiction books, so it has a very different feel to her later Six Tudor Queens series. That's just a heads up from me to you. I first read this book back in 2012. And it got me really into Alison Weir. Before that, I had read The Captive Queen and hadn't overly enjoyed it. So, up until this point, I hadn't read any other Alison Weir books. But this one blew everything else I knew about Alison Weir out of the water, and I was hooked. I originally got this book on audiobook. I had been listening to Alison Weir actual history books, like The Lady in the Tower, on Audible, while I was doing my foundation art degree, and I downloaded Innocent Traitor thinking it was an actual history book, and then was pleasantly surprised to find out it was historical fiction. This, of course, was back in the day of torrents, and you couldn't always tell what you were getting when it came to audiobooks. Having started this reread after years of not looking at this book, the first thought that comes into my head is that there are too many different perspectives in this book. You have Queen Jane Seymour, Queen Catherine Parr, the nurse Mrs. Ellen, Jane Grey, Frances Grey, Warwick. That is just too many people for this book, but it's still good. I think if Alison Weir was to write this book now, the whole thing would have been set from Jane Grey's perspective. However, Weir was still finding her feet, so I can forgive her that. It is very obvious at the beginning of this book that Frances, Jane's mother, is suffering from some sort of postnatal depression and is taking it out on Jane for not being a boy, seeing as Frances lost her first two sons shortly after birth. The plot: Henry and Frances Grey have to marry Jane to Prince Edward, later King Edward VI, is interesting because it sounds 100% possible. That is something an aristocratic family with a daughter the right age, especially with royal blood, would have schemed for. Because Henry always wanted to marry Edward to marry the first of Scotland, another cousin, so why not Jane, yet another cousin? I also enjoyed seeing the family dynamic with Frances, Jane, Catherine Parr, and Henry VIII when they are all at court together. They are all quite jovial together, and it's a normal family dynamic, even if it is very regal. I feel, however, it is extremely unlikely that Jane Grey, aged 8, was the person who discovered the plot against Catherine Parr by the Catholic faction. Talking about Catherine Parr, I definitely prefer this iteration of Catherine Parr to Weir's later version of Catherine Parr in The Sixth Wife. Parr is definitely more fun in The Innocent Traitor. I also enjoyed the interactions between Jane Grey and the Lady Elizabeth. They are funny and childish and completely normal, though Elizabeth is definitely more worldly and vain than Jane could ever be. I enjoyed Jane's reaction to Catherine Parr's death. I thought it was actually sadder than in The Sixth Wife. Maybe that was because of the outside perspective of somebody mourning, or maybe it is simply the fact that Catherine Parr is nicer in Innocent Traitor than she is in The Sixth Wife. She is not obsessed with religion in Innocent Traitor, and incredibly dull. Jane Grey has a unique viewpoint of Thomas Seymour's downfall because she is very sympathetic to him, which is not normally the viewpoint given by characters in historical fiction. He is normally seen as a plotter, grasping at straws against his brother. She sees him as a human and almost a father figure and feels extreme sympathy for him and his newborn daughter Mary. Now we move on to the plotting surrounding Jane and Guilford's marriage, and it is interesting, but I think it would be more interesting if there wasn't so many conflicting viewpoints. The book jumps around a lot, something I don't remember from previous reads, but I find it disconcerting and I'm not enjoying it. There is one viewpoint that is lacking, however, and I think it would have been more interesting than all the others put together, and that would be Guilford Dudley's viewpoint. The man is obviously a pig, but he is enthralled to his parents and seems scared of his father in the few interactions in You See Them Together, so it would have been interesting to see his perspective on his marriage and what was planned for Jane. He was also later then condemned to death alongside Jane and was nothing more than a puppet like Jane was. So how did he deal with his untimely execution? I would much rather have that than John Dudley going on about arsenic. Talking about John Dudley, it was extremely hard to see him mistreat the dying king. It was so difficult to read. If you have ever nursed anyone who is dying, you know exactly what I mean. You can't imagine inflicting more suffering on someone who is already in extreme pain. Jane seems very 15 when she accepts the crown at the Tower. She hates the Dudleys, but is so indecisive about her crown and naive about the ramifications that will come if Mary takes control, which of course she later did, and Jane thought she'd be allowed to live. Oh, so teenage and naive. It's painful, but also extremely realistic. Reading the final chapters of this book was more difficult on this reread than any before. Maybe because I'm older and I see Jane's vulnerability more clearly. Jane is very strong-minded and sits in her resolve not to convert. God knows I would have converted. You've got to feel that she was cruel to Guilford and her father at the end, but I understand that she was protecting herself because seeing them simply would have upset her and weakened her resolve not to convert and compromise what she viewed as her religious principles. The bit at the end where you get the headsman's POV really broke me, especially when Jane starts flailing around for the block. That is so sad. I nearly cried, and I was on my lunch break in work, so not good. Jane Grey's story is definitely one of the saddest stories in English history. I think it is even sadder than The Princes in the Tower, but that's my opinion. I give this book 8 out of 10. It is really good, however, I do feel it would have benefited from less POV characters. It's still a great read though. This is my third reread of this book and it still holds up, even if now I feel less is more, Alison Weir, less is more. And you can see how she has progressed as a writer, moving forward, learning from her mistakes. If you enjoyed this video, make sure and check out my playlist of Alison Weir book reviews I have on YouTube. I am currently reading The Heart of the Crown about the life of Henry VIII, and I will be reviewing it here on this channel, so subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Also, leave a comment on this video letting me know if you think there are too many POV characters in this book or not, because on my first reads I thought it was a perfect amount, and now I feel less so. So let me know. Also, between now and my next video, don't commit treason, guys. Bye!